Well, a very good morning and welcome to all the press corps for the press conference of His Excellency the Governor for the month of May. So, as usual, we'll start off with the Governor's statement.
Thank you very much, Richard. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm pleased that we have Mr. Robinson from MNI Live on the phone from Canada. This is the first time he has responded positively to a request to attend the press conference. I'm pleased it's towards the end of my tenure that he's there. This is the last, this is my penultimate press conference before my departure. We'll do another one in June. The last press conference was on the 8th of April, and it's obviously been a bit longer because we needed to take account of the UK election, the result of which was a surprise to everyone. We have new ministers back in place, but the FCO and DFID teams are the same. So that in particular, the FCO and DFID ministers that will lead on Montserrat remain for the FCO Mr. Duddridge and for DFID Mr. Swain. And I've encouraged the Premier to think of visiting the UK for discussions with those ministers sometime in July. And he said he will think about that. I wanted to make a few other opening remarks. Firstly, about the NDPRAC meeting we had yesterday, which discussed the state of readiness that we have for hurricanes and natural disasters. And I think I'd like to commend the Disaster Management Coordination Agency for their work in producing the annual State of Readiness report. There are a number of recommendations for follow-up, which we will need to do, and I'll be circulating a report of that. But two things of interest, I thought, was we looked at the management of the exclusion zone, in particular the possibility of tourist visits and more use of the exclusion zone as the volcano remains quiet. And I just want to make clear at this point that, contrary to some opinion, we are not exclusively or indeed at all looking simply at visits to the exclusion zones for tourists. This is also for local people, and we're hoping that we need to carry on with the program of accreditation, proper accreditation for tourist guides and taxi and bus drivers, but visiting the exclusion zone is something that we want to market for Montserrat, and it will be for locals and for tourists, and also if there are any legitimate business interests that people want to pursue in the exclusion zone. I should also add that although as a layman I have been perplexed, the MVO scientists are also perplexed that although they keep putting out weekly reports on the volcano which says everything is quiet, those weekly reports continue to show that there is a lot of sulfur dioxide coming out of the volcano still. And the last weekly report, for example, had something like 500 tons on average, with a maximum of 900 tons coming out of the volcano. And they simply can't work out why that is still happening. But while it is still happening, the volcano remains active. One thing I should highlight, because I'm very happy that this has happened, although I don't know what the analysis of the reports are going to be like, but the Integrity Commission, which of course was finally set up about 9 months ago, has sent out all the forms for the people in public life to register their assets and liabilities. And of the 70 forms that were sent out, 54 were received as of about 3 weeks ago, which is 77%. And the Commission and its staff will be will be analysing those returns and will be deciding what to do about the 16 or so people who have not returned their forms. I promised at my press conference to always give a monthly update on where we were on child safeguarding, and last month, or last press conference, I said that it had been agreed by both DFID and the government of Montserrat to ring-fence 1 million EC dollars for spending on child safeguarding this financial year. and there has been a planning meeting of how to spend this money in the first quarter, and we're going to be looking at a revamp of the foster care system, establishing a family centre, providing video links for the police, and various other initiatives in the education sector. So I'm pleased that's going ahead. I should say that my successor arrives, Elizabeth Carrier, on current plans will arrive at the week beginning the 3rd of August. And then finally, I'm going to ask Tony Bates to talk about the capability of the new APTN ship. And following that, I will read out a statement I have prepared on aviation security, and then we will throw it open to questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Your Excellency, and good morning, everybody. As the Governor's said, we've just recently had confirmation of the capability that will form the Atlantic Patrol Task North ship this coming hurricane season. HMS 7 leaves the Caribbean region around about the 7th of July, and she will be replaced and will hand over to RFA Lime Bay on about the same date. So Lime Bay will be in the region from around about the 7th of July. We have not yet had confirmation of when that ship will visit Montserrat or indeed any of the other overseas territories. What I can say is that ship represents probably, certainly in my experience, the best capability for APTN during any hurricane season that I can remember. She's a Royal Fleet auxiliary ship. She's about 177 metres long. She's about 29 metres wide. She has a ship's company of about 150 and will be supplemented with a Royal Naval team on board with a helicopter. This ship has a rather unique capability which I don't believe has been seen in the Caribbean before, in that the stern of the ship can be lowered down to form an internal dock within the belly of the ship, so boats can come in and out. And she has a vehicle deck which, from the pictures I've seen, can probably hold about 10 double-decker buses. So it's a magnificent capability. The flight deck itself can operate Chinook-sized helicopters, which is probably about 3 or 4 times the size of the normal Lynx helicopter that's on board. So I believe that the capability that we'll see in this season's ship is better than we've ever seen before. Obviously, a ship of that size is slower than a frigate, but in terms of responding to hurricanes, that makes no difference whatsoever, because a frigate and an RFA would cancel each other out in terms of speed when they're travelling through 30-foot seas. So that's what we're expecting. As I say, once we have confirmation of the dates, we'll start planning for a visit to Montserrat, which I expect will be no earlier than the beginning of August, but those are still to be arranged.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, I will now read out a statement on aviation security, and it begins, and I will make this available both in hard copy and electronically. Over the last 10 days, MNI has run a so-called exposé into allegations of irregularity and unsafe practices at Fly Montserrat. They have repeated allegations and stated them as facts. They have made allegations about my conduct as governor, which has been personally hurtful to myself, but much more so to my wife, who has perhaps unwisely taken very much to heart the usually uninformed comments that have attached themselves to the articles. When these types of campaigns are launched, there is always a fine dividing line to be drawn. Should they be given the oxygen of publicity by responding to them, or should they be suffered in a dignified silence, as response may be seen as legitimizing the statements included in them? Under normal circumstances, I would have adopted the latter approach. But because the subject in this case was aviation safety, I thought it was important that I responded to the allegations, which seemed designed to destroy the confidence of Montserratians and others in flying to Montserrat. In initially responding, I made what I now consider to be an error of presentation. I responded personally using the information that had been provided to me by the independent UK air safety regulator for the overseas territories, Air Safety Support International, ASI, and in relation to the two incidents relating to runway excursions and the tragic airport crash in Antigua, information supplied by the UK Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAIB. When I saw the third instalment of MNI's coverage, I realized my error, and I agreed with ASI that they would directly provide the information, which was published both on MNI and our Facebook page yesterday. The ASI press release makes it quite clear on the central point that it is ASI and not the governor who are directly responsible in the relevant legislation for the regulation of air safety of Montserrat and also in Anguilla and the British Virgin Islands. My role as governor is to hear appeals against ASI decisions. I have not had to do that in my tenure as governor. When we published the ASI statement on our Facebook page, I added 3 points of clarification, and I would like to repeat them here. Firstly, I was approached by a resident of Montserrat, Mr. A, in early 2014, who said he represented around 20 other individuals on the island who were concerned about safety practices at Fly Montserrat. The individuals produced various reports and statements in support of those claims. I thought that these allegations warranted further investigation. I told Mr. A that I would need to forward these allegations to ASI as the competent authority to carry out the investigations. On behalf of the group he represented, Mr. A agreed that this was the appropriate way forward. As the ASI press release makes clear, Mr. A was then contacted by ASI, who initiated a full investigation into the allegations. A professionally qualified investigator was appointed, statements were taken, and the investigation was completed. Mr. A was kept informed of the progress at various points. I did not share the allegations with Fly Montserrat, as it was clearly for ASI to address these concerns with Fly Montserrat independently. I did share the allegations with the then DFID representative in his official capacity, and in particular given his lead on managing the financial assistance provided by DFID for access, which obviously includes the subsidy provided to Fly Montserrat and other airlines. I believe that this was the correct thing to do. The DFID representative was asked to keep these allegations confidential, and he did so. Secondly, and again, as the ASI press release makes clear, I was not involved at all in the investigation into Fly Montserrat, which took place in 2014. Indeed, ASI were clear that it would be inappropriate for me to have any detailed knowledge of the investigation in case Fly Montserrat disputed the results of the investigation and appealed against its findings. If they had done so, I would have had to have heard the appeal, and it would have been improper for me to have been privy to the details of the investigation, in the event that did not happen. Finally, in relation to the tragic airport crash in Antigua in 2012, the only report that I saw was the preliminary report which I released in November 2013. It was published both as a press release in Montserrat and on MNI. It was given to me on an informal basis. It was on my initiative and not that of the ECCAA that it was published in the first place. Nothing further has been made available. As previously stated, it is the responsibility of ECAA to publish the accident report. The ECC website is available for inquiries, and inquiries about the availability or otherwise of a final report should most appropriately be addressed to the Director General of the ECCAA, Mr. Donald McPhail. There have now been 3 installments of this story on MNI. 2 responses have been provided by me and 1 by ASSI. MNI also responded to the ASSI press release last night. These exchanges are all freely available, and it will now be up to people to make up their own minds on the veracity or otherwise of one side or the other. As far as both ASSI and I are concerned, the correspondence is closed. ASSI will not be responding any further unless information that has not already been reported and taken into account by them comes to light. I will also not be taking any questions on this subject at this press conference. I will make this statement available to members of the press. Finally, on a point of information, as part of the regular programme of visits by ASSI, Maria Boyle, the Chief Executive Officer, will visit Anguilla and Montserrat in mid-June. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your opening presentation. And I note you said that you aren't going to take any questions, but on that particular issue. But also, there's another story that has been dominating the headlines, and it has to do with the MDC. And it's now become a saga where, you know, it is unraveling that a number of things have been happening on Montserrat. We've heard the UK government's position, and we have not heard DFID's position. And we like at this time, at least I would like at this time to hear from DFID as to their position on the whole issue.
Can I just before, let me just again, and I seem to be reading out a lot at this press conference, which is not something I normally do, but let's first be clear, there isn't a DFID position as opposed to a UK government position. So, as published on our Facebook page a couple of days ago, the response from the UK government to the Daily Mail article is that the UK has a constitutional responsibility under the UN Charter to ensure the reasonable needs of Montserrat, including healthcare, education, and basic infrastructure, are met. Value and results for taxpayers' money are at the heart of everything we do, and all our programs are closely scrutinized to ensure they are effective. Where there are concerns, we take swift and robust action, as we did when we suspended support for the Montserrat Development Corporation. There is the government of Montserrat and the MDC board have taken forward the MDC closure program, and there have been intensive discussions on it. Martin has participated in that, but the lead on it is really being taken by the Permanent Secretary in the Office of the Premier, Camille Gerald, and the current discussion is about who is absorbed back into the government and on what terms, and to make sure that we continue to have an effective tourism and investment promotion program in the interim while we decide what we do about replacing the Montserrat Development Corporation. Is there anything you want to add to that, Martin?
No, I think that's very clear. Thank you, Governor.
So then, Your Excellency, you chose to answer. So can I ask a provocative question then? The UK government has taken a decision, or DFID, as you quite rightly said, there isn't a separation, that they're going to suspend the funding for the MDC. And secondly, we've been hearing that the government of Montserrat is the one who closed the MDC. So then, if there's a suspension of funding, it actually means that the MDC would not be able to function.
Well, MDC is a wholly owned company of the government of Montserrat, and it was they that made the decision on the basis of the task force report to close down the corporation. They being the government of Montserrat. Okay, there was a cabinet decision just before Easter. The sequence of DFID deciding to suspend funding is related to that decision. I mean, the two are inextricably linked. But it was the government of Montserrat, and I was in cabinet when we took the decision, who decided on the basis of the recommendations of the task force review, which, if you recall, had Julian Daniel as chairman, Felicia Lynch, the consultant who's on the island, Martin, and who was the lady? Jasmine from... Okay, so independent review report decided on this. And we are determined to try and treat the interests of the employees as sensitively as possible.
I understand there's a question from Toronto from Jivon.
Yes, thanks, Richard. Are you hearing me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good. This question for is well, not really a question, as in not taking questions. It's very unfortunate that the governor would choose to read out a statement just now, which, by the way, is filled with a few inaccuracies, very emotional language, and what I would call deflective prose. I would say that the expose, as you refer to it, Your Excellency, was not written to cause you or your wife, as you stated, any emotional upset. The cause of the media is not to respond to emotions, but to expose information that was not previously available in the public. Now, there's still lots of questions to answer. The whole reason I'm participating in this press conference was to pose those questions directly to you. However, you've decided not to take questions, which, by the way, is very unfortunate, and which would continue to reflect that there's still lots of issues still to go regarding the Fly Montserrat issue. However, having said that, regarding the concerns that the NDC, as James White Jr. raised just now, in terms of moving forward, a forward-moving strategy, what exactly is being proposed for exactly the projects that the NDC was doing, and also reconstituting a body to continue works under the NDC, as mentioned just now?
I'll ask Martin Dawson to reply to that.
Yes, thank you. There are a number of things that are happening. Obviously, some of the ongoing work streams and activities that the MDC were still working on at the time of closure have been subsumed back into government. But many of these sort of infrastructure programs hadn't come to a natural conclusion. I'm currently having discussions with Camille Gerald, the PS at the Office of the Premier, and also Felicia Lynch, who's the program manager for our public service reform program, to really help the government and its processes for, in the short to medium term, how it can meet the tourism and trade and investment program that it wants to follow. We've got some suggestions for bringing some additional technical support into government to help with that, but also how we can support the program financially from DFID. So that's where we are. And then as a result of those discussions, we'll then be considering in the future what type of entity that needs to be created, if that's what's decided, to replace the MDC. But it's still very early stages at the moment.
Martin, just tagging along on that. The MDC issue, and I'm looking at procurement policies, and this area seems to be causing quite a bit of consternation, grief, I might say, at some stages. Tell us what is happening with procurement.
Well, on procurement, and I'm aware that Mr. Robinson's also published something on his website this week that I think actually set out the issues very, very clearly. We are currently working with government very closely on strengthening the capacity of procurement. We're still following Government of Montserrat rules and regulations, but DFID's role here is very much an oversight on activities within the Government of Montserrat, but also to strengthen the capacity and with also a recommendation to bring in a head of procurement. The only thing that we've done is, as was previously announced, is that for new investments such as the geothermal, such as fibre optics, such as the ferry, DFID decided that it would handle the procurement of those activities, but everything else that's ongoing, and particularly the procurements that is required within the recurrent budget, so the list of activities that have been given on the website, they're still within the hands of the Government of Montserrat. So that process is, with our oversight, is continuing. The only other additional support is work that we're giving on the standard operating procedures, getting clarity on those, and so putting the new rules and regulations into place that will then be obviously subsequently approved by Cabinet. So that process is ongoing, and then a period of training, because there are going to be new operation or new procedures that need to be bedded down, and people need to be trained in those new procedures. So that's what's going on.
Just a follow-up before I hand over the mic. Is there a time frame that we're looking at by which time certain aspects of procurement will be handed over, or the whole procurement program will be handed back to the government of Montserrat?
Well, there is not a fixed time frame. Obviously, our ultimate objective is to hand back all procurement back to the government of Montserrat, and that would include any further new investments. So it's really as quickly as we can get the new head of profession into post, and there has been a recruitment process for that. Also, the training, obviously the legislation going through cabinet to get the new regulations approved, and then the training process on that. I mean, optimistically, I would say maybe 6 to 9 months. That's very optimistic. It could be within the year. I don't know. I think these factors have got to be put into place first.
Just remind people of what this new commercial head of procurement would do, what the position is. Yeah,
it's really to head up the unit, the procurement unit within the government, to help set the strategy for future procurement and help the government departments really have their procurement plans in place and how they will be delivered, but also then to make sure that the staff are trained and following the procedures that eventually will be the new government procedures agreed by Cabinet. That's the sort of role in a nutshell.
Your Excellency, there are many comments on the same article that was published in the UK, where British citizens are basically outraged at what they perceive to be mismanagement of their tax dollars. What do you intend to do to reassure them that their money was not in fact wasted, if that is the case?
I think it's a matter of pride for the UK that we are one of the only member of the G7 that is committed and has put into law the fact that we will spend 0.7% of our GDP on international development assistance. That has meant, as I've said many times from this table, that during the last 4 or 5 years, when other government departments have been suffering really severe cuts, the DFID budget has increased. As I say, I think this is something that we should all be proud of, and it was and it is completely agreed by all the, again, what was 3 major parties. Now the 3rd major party in the UK is the SNP. I'm not sure what their view on it is, but we are proud of that. What comes with that increase in budget at a time when other budgets are declining is intense scrutiny, so that the kind of comments, particularly that there were in the Daily Mail, would equally, is not Montserrat specific, to be honest. Any story, particularly run in the Daily Mail about international aid, is going to be about how awful international aid is and what a waste of money it is. And the people that will read it will respond in that way. But we know that that is not true. The Secretary of State, who has also been returned, Justine Greening, and her predecessors have always been clear that with this increase in budget comes great responsibility to ensure that taxpayers' money is spent in as efficient and effective manner as possible, and that the value for the taxpayer, the British taxpayer in this case, is maintained. And she and all the other senior management in DFID are relentless in their determination that that should happen. Because also with this budget has come much greater public, but also parliamentary, all sorts of other scrutiny, and we need to be able to defend it. So I think my response would be that you would get those kind of comments about any article about international aid. Indeed, we always have done. It is not particularly popular in the UK, but on the other hand, all the political parties have committed to providing a substantial international aid budget despite public opinion. And again, I think that's something as a nation we should be proud of.
Your Excellency, I have to join Jivan for you to bring a statement, a long statement which you have written, and then to say that you're not going to take questions on it. Why are you wasting the press conference time to read a statement and then say you're not taking questions on it? I've had comments on as to what I think about that before. You're not hearing me? Oh,
Am I hearing that?
how can we?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just commenting on what you said, or rather adding to what you said regarding reading a statement that you're not taking questions on, especially when it's a long statement. To to go back to this Facebook thing that I heard about, was what on Facebook, was that put on Facebook by HMG, or did you put that on Facebook?
Sorry, what Facebook thing? Can you be a bit more specific?
Something about, what's it called? What was it?
Your last response just now. About the
Right.
Oh, on the article.
The Daily Mail article.
No,
The response on the Daily Mail.
Sorry, which one are you talking about? ASSI or the Daily Mail article?
I'm now speaking. I've left the statement, which you're not
Right,
taking
okay.
questions. I think that's an insult
That
to
was
us.
a UK government statement which we put on our Facebook page.
That was, and was that intended for the public of Montserrat?
Yes.
But Your Excellency, how many times I'm going to say that? That's an insult to the media in Montserrat. Why would you expect me to go to Facebook, to search Facebook, to find something that is for the public of Montserrat? I really take serious offense to that. And we've been through this many times. Could you please comment on that?
Yes, I'm a greater supporter of social media than you seem to be.
Social media, Your Excellency, does not take care of the public of Montserrat. Or else then we might
It
as
is
well
picked
shut
up-
down
it-
ZGB, and we might just
Well,
shut
no,
down
on the
Montserrat
contrary,
Reporter.
it is picked up almost automatically by Narissa at Discover MNI, at Spirit of Montserrat, and ZJB. It's only you. And you use social media yourself, so I'm not
Nerissa,
quite sure why it's a problem.
Precisely, and it doesn't become public for the thousands of readers who look at the Montserrat Reporter, whether it's on social
So they
media
don't follow
or
your
or
tweets?
the website. Excuse me?
They don't follow your tweets?
I'm
I
not
follow your
interested in them
tweets.
following my tweets. I don't care whether you follow them or not. My tweets are really it's not something I use a lot. And Nerissa does a good job at doing what she's doing for social media. That's good, because there's the social media crowd, but there are all of the other crowds who do not follow social media. The majority, in fact. And I'd like you to know that. It's display of a certain amount of ignorance. Now, I'd like to know from you, what really is your role in Montserrat as governor, other than the constitutional roles whereby you're in charge of the defense and the public sector and so on. What's your role? And what's your responsibility? And that's the answer I'm looking for, to the people of Montserrat.
I think you just said it yourself. There is nothing outside of the Constitution. Would you expect me to take a role outside of my role, my responsibility as set out in the Constitution?
Indeed. You sit as chairman, president
Of the cabinet, yes.
And there are things that cabinet ought to do or not do, which you seem to know nothing about.
I know everything
Regularly.
the cabinet does.
What they do, but what about the other things that you should take up based on the things that they're telling you that they should have done? And I'm referring, on all of this, I'm really hitting at the whole MDC situation. Address us on that.
Well, I think we've already discussed this in previous press conferences. Insofar as anything came to cabinet about MDC, it was the only thing with the previous government was some
All right, so we know
policy
what
about demarcation
lands,
of land.
lands,
Right,
yes,
exactly. After the new government came in, they made the decision, almost as soon as they came in, to replace the board. It took a couple of months for them to line up the people they wanted to take over, as indeed is their right, and that came to cabinet. Otherwise, as again, just to refer to my statement or the background, MDC is a wholly owned company of the government of Montserrat.
Of which the government cabinet is the sole shareholder.
The government of Montserrat, not the cabinet particularly.
Your Excellency, please.
No, not
semantics, please.
I'm not. It's not semantics.
The cabinet is the supreme body of the elected people.
And they delegated that to the MDC board.
Your Excellency, no. Clearly, again, There's I have in front of me here some bylaws, but let me fast forward. So we got a report. What does that report say to you now?
Which report? The task force report?
The task force report. What does it say to you about what you ought to have known and what should have come to cabinet?
I don't know what should have come to cabinet. What comes to cabinet, unless
are you saying, Excellency, that you have read this report?
Can I answer your question first, please? What should have come to cabinet is something that the previous government and the new government should have brought if they felt necessary. The only things that I, of my own cognizance, bring to cabinet is about the public service and appointments with it, financial services, and anything to do with defence. Otherwise, the running of economic policy in this country, and I think you would be very surprised if it wasn't so, is entirely devolved to your elected government. It would not be appropriate for me to be involved in economic policy. As stuff comes to cabinet, I have a voice in the formulation of that economic policy and have an opinion, which I give. But it is up to the government to decide what it wants to do.
Did you have an opinion on the fact that our highest paid person in Montserrat, probably, don't know what you were paid, did not pay, well, I know you pay tax to the British government and you probably pay tax in Montserrat, but you pay taxes someplace. Doesn't it concern you that anyone in Montserrat leaves this country receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars and did not pay a penny of tax?
Well, I'm glad you don't accuse me of having a Swiss bank account, but
maybe you do, Your Excellency. You can tell us if you do or not.
No, that would be confidential information.
Exactly, so why would I accuse you?
I did not know the details of the previous CEO's pay package.
And precisely.
I didn't know his
was
contract.
A decision. That was a decision that should have been made where? In cabinet. So we'll move forward. You didn't know about it.
No, I didn't.
Martin, what is DFID's role and responsibility? You just mentioned a while ago something about oversight. So one of the concerns, take for example the whole problem with the spending and NDC and so on. A DFID member was always on board, on the various boards. What really ought to have been his role? You talk about oversight. What does that entail?
Well, the role of the DFID representative on the MDC board was as observer status, as it's called. So it's purely there as an observer.
And as observer, does he report to his superiors?
Well, it's part of, yes, of course. I mean, I respond, or I report directly to the deputy director of DFID's Overseas Territories Department. So he would have also been required to do the same.
I do hope Jivan is listening, because I'm sure he has some follow-up questions on these lead questions I'm asking. Yes, okay. There was a report that was issued and was boasted upon by the CEO of thing. You told us in this press in here that report was not. What's the term? Was not.
It was never approved.
It was not approved.
No.
And so things that were said by one party and other things that were said, should we not? Whenever I refer to it, I usually say that you've said that it wasn't approved, etc., etc. But it's been used against, I would say, some of the things that you folks have had in your task force report.
Yes. Well, that report wasn't approved. Obviously, the process of the annual review that took place last summer involved a number of team members from the MDC, including the CEO. So he would have had a draft of the report, as it was still in draft at that time, in July. It was not approved because of concerns that were then raised in August, September, that obviously thought, well, that annual review, there seems to be some other issues here. So formally, informally, it does not exist. It's not been approved by DFID as an annual review of the MDC.
And sorry, just to confirm, when the CEO released part of that report, he did so actually against DFID's wishes. We did not agree, or it was not agreed that he should release that report.
But he still left Montserrat as a darling and a golden boy, as against others who have been disenfranchised, who were eventually terminated, people who did no wrong, and people who, in fact, and I want you to comment on that, both of you, who, in fact, did good for Montserrat and through the MDC. They were disenfranchised in different ways.
I think it would not be appropriate for either Martin or I to answer that question, if it is a question.
Why
Seems
is that?
like more of a comment.
Why
Well,
is that?
because as we all know, there is at least one set of proceedings going through the court, and anything we may or may not say in relation to that could be used, and therefore it would be entirely inappropriate for us to make any comments.
Expected answer, but just so I raised it. Nerissa, I'm trying to watch the time, so I'll make sure I get you in.
Yes, it's good listening to these exchanges. I have to say that the governor's press conference has always been viewed, many persons say, as a hallmark of transparency. And what is quite unfortunate, that I really have to reiterate what Bennett has said in his initial statements, is that, regarding the Fly Montserrat issue, the governor essentially is shirking those responsibilities of transparency by issuing a statement that is very emotive and misleading and still leaves a lot of questions to answer, which we will write about. However, regarding the issue of the MDC, procurement, etc., what I want to ask Martin, Bennett spoke about the observer status that you yourself mentioned. Sorry, Martin. So if DFID was maintaining an observer status on the MDC board, how is it that you were not aware that operational funds were being used to carry out projects by the MDC, as was reported in the task force review? Because you stated, you confirmed, as the task force review confirmed, that you were there as observer. So if you are observing, how come DFID did not observe these inaccuracies and misuse of funds?
Sorry, I do apologise. Jeevan, I think I haven't caught you off or cancelled your call there. Well, I can only comment for myself, really, Jeevan. I've been here since September, and the observer status, I've been following my observer status from that. I don't think I can comment on what happened before.
Are you saying, though, Martin, that should have been, that sort of thing should have been observed and reported? In other words, I'm going to say if you were here.
If I was here, then I would have observed that, and if I felt necessary, I would have reported on it.
That was your duty.
That was my duty.
Can you give us, as we're talking about that very situation, give for me, Martin, and you came in September. I have reported and asked you before about this, the MOU that was done for this the new arrangement, the new monies that MDC had been spending, started in September 2013. And in there was this arrangement whereby David had the right to suspend funds, delay funds, etc., etc. Was that what was invoked last October?
Not solely against the MOU or with the MOU in mind. I think the issues that were raised by the concerns that the new government had raised on MDC and then DFID's subsequent internal audit report.
What were those issues?
Well, those are the issues that the task force then looked at within the governance arrangements and policies and procedures within the MDC. So on the basis of that sort of chronology of the order of how events took place with government concerns, DFID's internal audit, then the decision made in December by DFID to suspend funding. That was how it was done. And then we had then formed the task force in order to look at the specific issues. The government asked us to on the basis of the other two bits of work to then look at it in more detail, that the recommendation was then made to close.
So it would be correct to say that you were following, DFID was following the arrangements in that, the context of that arrangement, where if they observe certain things, they suspend funding, etc., and eventually the government, in discussion with the government, because it was either the government or DFID who could do this, the government would then have a discussion with DFID, and that basically is what brought the task force into being.
Yes. So it was the government. After we'd done the internal audit process, and the government's obviously raised initial concerns, the government said, we'd like to look at this, can you look at this more closely, and we'll form a task force to do that. And they said, would you like to participate? And I said, yes.
You have not made the DFID audit report, which really catapulted into all of this activity, that audit in October. What about the audit? It's been kept from us, it's not public, whatever. What about it that really we don't know anything about?
Well, it identified the areas I've just been talking around governance and policies and procedures, value for money. That was what was a big factor that the governor also mentioned. Those are the areas highlighted of weaknesses and concerns, and that's ultimately what the task force looked at.
The task force report, was it a report to an end in the that was decided upon? In other words, was it a foregone conclusion that the MDC would have been shut down?
It produced 4 recommendations, one of which was for the MDC to be shut down. That was the preferred recommendation of the task force, but it was up to the government and the cabinet, to decide whether they agreed with the recommendations. They were recommendations.
What is not clear to me is
and sorry, those recommendations were set out in the executive summary, which we made available.
Which told the people of Montserrat nothing. So, and having gone through the report, I do not know how we could come to that conclusion to shut down the MDC. I just don't have the time to discuss this. So can you tell me really, do you think, Martin, that what you guys reported in here support the actions that you all have taken? The eventual action?
Yes, I do. I think that's why we made the recommendation that we did. I mean, and I've also highlighted in previous press conferences, I think some of the difficulties that the MDC face were really from the start, from its creation, and many of the other issues and opportunities that were had to address some of the concerns over the last years that hadn't been taken. And I think the recommendation to actually stop it and start again and create something that should be created properly was the right way to do it. I think you can do as much sort of tinkering and probably making improvements as you like, and that wasn't, they tried that in the past and they weren't adopted for whatever reason. So I think it's better to just stop and start again anew.
And believe you me, you just told me exactly what I'm saying. There was not a thing wrong with MDC. Nothing was wrong with MDC. Even in your report speaks to that. Nothing was really wrong with MDC. People were doing things wrong in MDC, which is really what I'm getting at with the governor. People were doing things wrong, not following the rules. That's what your report spoke about. I mean, throughout is what it addressed. That's why I don't know why it wasn't made public.
I mean, one of the issues which made it seem sensible to close down and restart was this absence of proper legislation, and it wasn't established in a proper way, as it turns out, and that's what we're going to be doing in particular in the next few months, to actually establish it as a statutory body, formally, or some other kind of vehicle.
Yes, whatever comes along as an implementing body in the future will be...
Before I pass it on to think, I wish you'd bring some legal person to explain what you're saying there, because what your people are telling us, no proper legislation. The whole Companies Act is legislation, Your Excellency. What are you saying? Your bylaws.
The thing is that the MDC was set up under the Companies Act with bylaws. It should have been set up under the MDC Act of 2008 with its own legislation setting out very clearly what the organisation could and should do. And that wasn't done.
And Martin, if this was my own company, people are going to be taken to court for not carrying out the things that I would have had in my own company. It's the laws of the country. What are you all talking about?
Martin, just to clarify, you said that you were speaking right now with Camille about plans for what time frame are we looking at in terms of having some sort of vehicle to help stimulate the private sector as it relates to investment, small business development growth?
Well, I don't know whether it would be a vehicle as such, but the initial thoughts are how we can bring in some technical expertise within the government of Montserrat, both from a trade and investment point of view, but also tourism. So there would probably be individuals, but then so it's really to help government work on its strategy and how it wants to take forward those very key aspects of development in Montserrat, and then really also their role would be to help decide, well, what's the best way of implementing that.
So there were no strategies at the MDC that we could literally just transfer into a new system? Well, so why are we almost going back to the drawing board?
Not entirely going back to the drawing board. Obviously, there was a trade and investment angle, and there would have been a tourism angle as well. But I think so that existed in MDC. I think the important thing now is to consider where Montserrat is going to in the future and what it wants to be doing. I mean, obviously, as we know, the very much the focus of MDC was around the Little Bay and Cars Bay area of operation, when in fact it was originally established as a trade and investment promotion agency for Montserrat. So I think it's good to get the opportunity to actually rebalance some of that thinking, and we'll say, well, we're not just solely focusing on Little Bay and Cars Bay, it is trade, investment and tourism for Montserrat.
Okay. Just a final question, because I see our time is almost up. Governor, you said yesterday NDPRAC. Sorry. Oops. NDPRAC met. I'm just wondering if the conversation led to the discussion about the water issue and where Montserrat stands on our water supply in this environment with lots of drought.
It didn't, but do you want to elaborate, or does either do you?
Yeah, as the governor said, it didn't feature really, partly because the focus of the discussion was the Director of Disaster Management's State of Annual Readiness report, which covers a whole range of hazards. And in terms of the focus of discussion, the top hazards that were discussed were hurricanes, volcanoes, tsunamis, earthquakes, oil spills. So the water shortage sort of featured lower down the list, and therefore didn't feature in the actual discussions.
So clearly, there wasn't a need for concern then, I suppose. Otherwise, it would have come up higher.
It certainly wasn't raised by. Sorry, it wasn't raised by the ministers at the meeting.
All right. So following up, because I know you recently went to the disaster meeting in Miami as well. Looking at what the report says about Montserrat, what do we need to do? How ready are we? Have we really fallen off? And what do we need to fix right now as it relates to disaster preparedness?
There is nothing that needs doing in Montserrat that doesn't also need doing in the other territories. So I think that probably the main focus is that the main departments and agencies need to have robust and tested plans in place. And that was one of the issues of discussion yesterday.
I mean, what is always said, and we have been lucky in the last 4 or 5 years not to have any natural disasters, either volcano or hurricane related, is that Montserrat has it in its psyche, will pull out all the stops if something hits us. We're a bit worried that 4 or 5 years, maybe memories are eroding, but there is always that feeling, and that sometimes contributes to reluctance to intensively practice plans and make sure that you've actually got proper arrangements in place. But it's an understandable human reaction as well, of course. Final question.
Martin, I'm going to just follow on from where Nerissa asked a question about the generation of economic activity, private sector and otherwise. I'm looking at housing and a time frame for approval. I think there's just in excess of $20 million for housing projects and so on. Where are we in terms of the approval on this? just to stimulate some economic activity on island?
Yes, it's not so much solely just around housing of that figure, James. It's
Well,
actually,
I just mentioned housing as one.
Housing,
yeah.
And it's within a new business case, an infrastructure business case that is actually sitting on my deputy director's desk at the moment for her final sign-off, which is around emergency housing. There was some emergency housing identified last year of certain vulnerable residents in social housing that need to be improved. There's also other infrastructure around sewerage, water supply, roadworks. Yeah. You've got it. So water and sanitation as well. And that's when Narissa was asking me about water, I wonder if that was in the context of that. So some of the sort of maintenance issues around water supply and obviously cutting down on the leaks. So I'm really, really hoping that my deputy director will approve that, if not today, then tomorrow, because I know the Premier is also very keen to hear what the proposal on is it approved, because then we can start to get things moving and moving ahead with some of these very important infrastructure projects.
Okay, and just to allay the fears that Nerissa had, I was in touch with the water division, and they're saying we're at a comfortable stage, but they're still sending out that warning that, you know, just to be conservative, don't waste water and so on. So we are not at a critical stage.
I'm not expecting answers now, but there is the procurement thing that you talked about. There's been no procurement done in Montserrat for how many days, how many months?
There has been procurement done. I mean, part of the issue has been that the procurement board hasn't been in existence, but now we've sat twice, and in fact I'm going to a procurement board meeting at 2 o'clock
today. So if you can respond to me in text, because time is running out,
yeah.
And your people have more. In actual fact, no procurement could be done as long as it's been done by you folks, because it's not going to be done under the Montreal laws. Comment on that for me, please, in writing. And the Banking Act, Your Excellency, is there any role that you play? You have any comments that you can give? Could you please share them with the media?
You're talking about the ECCB?
Banking Act.
Yeah, no, not really.
You have no role to play in it?
No, I do have a role, but I'm not sure there's anything to report. This is something that the Premier and the Financial Secretary are working on. It requires, I mean, it's a uniform act which needs to be introduced in the whole of the Eastern Caribbean monetary area. So it's not something on which Montserrat can take unilateral action.
Right, and Nerissa had raised a couple of things that are coming out in the newspaper. I would like to get some comments on that when they do come out. She had raised the issue of how we go forward, what timeline when we take these new things into tourism and trade, when we take them forward and so on and so on. There's some comments in the newspaper that I would really like to get some feedback on.